think Prisma changes the social choreography of the field in a way, or it has the potential to, and at least it did for 2 weeks. At Prisma, I was working as the dance editor for the Prisma publication, which was a melting pot that happened every morning throughout the forum. And then I taught a workshop called Limits of the Self, Imagine, Inhabit, Inhibit, Escape. And additionally, I moderated some panels that were part of the daily plenary sessions. I mean, the workshop was sort of coming out of some of my own like research for choreography that has to do with subjectivity, deconstructing the self, escaping the self, reimagining ourselves, things like that, and trying to present a body that is perhaps seen first as energy before it's seen as an image. All my participants were Mexican. I didn't have any, I had a few people who were coming from the international context, but most everyone was Mexican. The most interesting thing about Prisma had to do with this like formation of trying to deal with real social and political questions and problems within the contemporary dance context. I think, for instance, there's inherently like a lot of real global political economy issues that are coming up when you're dealing with an international contemporary art or contemporary dance context and conversation, and importing all these kind of important people who are labeled as such. I mean, of course, not someone like me, but you know, like Xavier Leroy, or like Jan Ritsema, David Zambrano, a lot of people who are, let's say, are established in a certain circuit of information that is supported by the marketplace. And I think it was the intention of Montserrat as well as Horacio to bring that information, some of that information, to Mexico to give the artists there access to more information and ideas that are happening on an international scale. But also in that gesture, from how I was experiencing, and of course everything I say is from my point of view, there were a lot of inconsistencies. Is the high-minded, like whatever, let's say theoretically thinking-oriented dance of, you know, 1990s Europe, is it relevant in Mexico City? Is it relevant to the bodies that exist in this society? And perhaps it isn't relevant, or it is, but in like a very different kind of way than it's being articulated. I mean, in Oaxaca, there were some forums that I sat in on, and there were such different languages being spoken in the room. And because there were people from all over the world. So yeah, I mean, there was a constant translation back and forth between English and Spanish, which was quite amazing. They had these incredible translators, and it was really professionally done. There were headsets. But even in that, there were different languages on like a social cultural level. On the one hand, you could see like problems of artistic ego coming out, or elements of it, let's say, and also like real differences that are political and economic, differences of identities that are created in the world, you know, and that we try to escape them. We talk about we live in a global world, but on the other hand, I think, you know, where you're born is still what kind of passport you're allowed to have, or you do have. And let's say you're born, you could be born in Burkina Faso, but if you're from a wealthy family, you can get access to, you can buy a different kind of passport. Maybe you will choose politically never to do that. But I just think like locality really matters. Okay, so the model was interesting because you had like all these different elements, like the extension projects, the melting pots, which were collaborations, or they were something like the publication, which a group of people worked on. There were performances every night. There were platform performances for like, you know, more experimental type of work, or pieces that weren't coming from as established names, meaning there were no tickets sold. They weren't on the marketplace yet. There were labs, there were plenary sessions every single day for 2 hours. There was music, there was theater, there was dance. I mean, it was a lot. It was almost so much you couldn't cover it all. And I think that was a strength as well as a weakness, because, for instance, the extension projects, which proposed, let's say, a different model, and you had artists working with artistic practices in the communities themselves and sort of dialoguing. This was not really a boundary that was crossed by most of the people who were coming from the outside context to Prisma.
Right.
Or, like, let's say, the Mexican artists who were coming. And I saw, like, this amazing performance that was done by an American conductor with young kids who play instruments, and they were in the theater, and he took all of their talent, but he also differentiated probably their habits of performance, because he had students in the audience who were playing music from all different spaces in the theater. So at the one hand, you had like the conventional setup of the band on stage with everybody in their place, but unexpectedly in the middle of the performance, there were like little girls playing trumpets like right behind my ear, and then there were people up here and there and everywhere, and it was just a really, I think, successful project. It was like, whoa, it was a memorable experience for me in the theater, and I see a lot of things, and I'll always remember this performance. I mean, my question is, the artists in Mexico, how much information did they get? And I spoke to different artists, and I think it was really diversified. Some people thought it was really enriching, and other people were really kind of frustrated by this, like, oh, I'm international, I went to parts, I'm doing my project here in Mexico, it has money from Europe, and like, here I am. So it's like this parachuting, like, I have ideas, I have resources, I've been validated in some canon of knowledge, and let me just like land. And not all of them, of course. I heard a lot of Mexican artists say really wonderful things about expanding ideas or what's possible in the field, and I think that was definitely one of the goals of Prisma. I hope it happens again, but I don't know economically if it's going to be possible. The one thing I would like to see in the future is that somehow you can create structures so that these different languages people are speaking, like, have more of an entry point, like, to engage in what are these differences about and how do we really learn from them. Because these differences are like, this is the map, right? Mm-hmm. Like, this is the map now for me. Like, these differences, and how do we deal with them? It's like, we don't know what will happen with the publication process, because apparently we need funding to finish it. The idea was that it was going to be like a telenovela, copying from this like very street kind of thing that happens in Mexico, like all these telenovela publications. So we were throwing like bits and pieces, like, we had like Gossip Column, we had all the shows were covered, transcriptions from really like some of the most amazing plenary sessions, different people going into workshops, just sort of taking tabs on what was going on. We were collecting submissions from Mexican artists about their perception of things. She was trying to get submissions from the people who are working at the facility, where the casa in Oaxaca, where it was like the central point for Prisma. And I think this is one way to talk about these differences. And then you have like someone like Hester Martinez. She's a very vocal person, but she's definitely against the non-dance trend, or like this intellectualization of dance. And she has reasons for it, but this is a total difference, right? And so she submitted an article. With the extensions projects, we thought this really does need to be documented. And I think this was one of Montserrat's goals, in that she said, this is what makes Prisma different than a regular festival. Yes.
There he is.